This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Welcome to this episode of the show. It's Jesperson here with Hicks. This is a show where we're going to cover a lot of ground. We've been planning for quite some time on checking in with Reanne Booker. She's going to join us. She's a palliative care nurse practitioner. She's got a lot of experience in the field or in the particular avenue of healthcare, helping folks in one of the most difficult times of their life. Also, maybe one of the most beautiful times, kind of in a way. If you're at a point where you've been able to look at the autumn or the winter, the end of someone's life as a beautiful moment as opposed to purely painful, then you'll know what I mean. But it's obviously tough. It's always tough for folks that are trying to wrap their mind around losing somebody dear to them, losing them forever. And what about the people themselves? But more and more Canadians are thinking ahead about this type of stuff, and not just in an estate planning kind of a way, or not just discussing their end of life wishes with family members, but choosing how they'll say goodbye. More and more Canadians are choosing MAiD, medical assistance in dying. But there's a lot of conversation around that, and not a lot of it is fact-based. As a matter of fact, a lot of it is politically charged. And so we thought it was time to check back in with Reanne. The focus of her PhD research, she's earning a doctorate right now, is the integration of palliative care in oncology, in cancer care. And she's the past president of the Canadian Association of Nurses in Oncology. So this is something that she's around every single day. She's got an informed perspective on this. And after several conversations about this on the show over the past little while with Dr. Paul Parks from the Alberta Medical Association last week, with Senator Paula Simons a few weeks ago, who talked to us about her family's experience and how it kind of fit in, and with National Post columnist Tristan Hopper as well, who kind of kickstarted this conversation a number of weeks ago. We'll continue that today with Reanne Booker. But first, Jagmeet Singh stopping the presses yesterday, Johnny, making national news, pulling his party out of their agreement with the Liberals, the agreement that's allowed the Liberals to operate kind of sort of like a majority government, even though they're not. And we're going to get to the implications of that in just a bit. You may say that Jagmeet Singh, in a way, is doing Pierre Poilievre's bidding, but Poilievre's doing nothing but call him names. Sellout Singh, as you'll hear again and again.
It's like
in
we're
just
watching
a second.
soap opera.
It's unbelievable. So we'll get to that. The implications of that. What's Jagmeet Singh hoping to accomplish? What does this mean for Justin Trudeau? But first, we want to remind you that this episode is happening with the support of Business Career College, who has a focused message. Listen, Pierre Poilievre's about to talk about housing prices and the budget, and I'm about to remind you about interest rates. And of course, as you have finance on the brain, it's worth pointing out that this next generation of investors, the leaders of today and tomorrow, 3/4 of them that have been polled say that they're interested in adding digital assets to their finance portfolios. And that's why Business Career College is rolling out the CDAA. That's a designation program for financial advisors and senior finance professionals, otherwise known as the Certified Digital Asset Advisor. So this helps you build a stable foundation that'll future-proof your own career as a financial advisor, where you'll better understand Bitcoin, blockchain, NFTs, decentralized finance, and of course, you'll be able to answer your clients and your potential clients' questions. Business Career College has been a leader in financial training since 1997, so you know that they're going to nail this one. And you can nail it yourself, save 20% on the investment in that designation program. That's the CDAA, by using the promo code Ryan20. That's all one word, Ryan20, when you visit businesscareercollege.com. Johnny, you and I are working on getting our videos out. We're planning upcoming episodes, and then all of a sudden the bombshell drops, and we hear federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh announce, I guess to Justin Trudeau, but announce to the nation that the NDP is done propping up that Liberal minority government. Everybody's going, what does this mean? But first, let's go to the tail of the tape.
Sure.
This is what the federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh had to say.
Today, I notified the Prime Minister that I've ripped up the supply and confidence agreement. Canadians are fighting a battle for the future of the middle class. Justin Trudeau has proven again and again he will always cave to corporate greed. The Liberals have let people down. They don't deserve another chance. There is an even bigger battle ahead. the threat of Pierre Poilievre and conservative cuts from workers, from retirees, from young people, from patients, from families. He will cut in order to give more to big corporations and wealthy CEOs. The fact is, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. They cannot be the change. They cannot restore the hope. They cannot stop the Conservatives. But we can. In the next federal election, Canadians will choose between Pierre Poilievre's callous cuts or hope. Hope that when we stand united, we win. That Canada's middle class will once again thrive together. In Canada, we take care of our neighbors. That's who we are. I've embraced that value my whole life. I'm running for Prime Minister because together we can and will stop conservative cuts. We can deliver relief and restore hope, fix healthcare, build homes you can afford, stop price gouging. It's always impossible until it isn't. It can't be done until someone does it. If we're together, nothing is impossible. And we won't let them tell us it can't be done. Big corporations and wealthy CEOs have had their government. It's the people's time.
Okay, so
This is
yeah. We should probably note that's not our music, by the way.
No.
This was a video. So this was a video released by the federal NDP, so pre-recorded, and we've seen some interesting. You may have seen it as well, Real Talkers. Some interesting emails that were leaked that had gone out to the NDP caucus that were basically saying nobody's doing interviews on this, nobody's commenting on this. The video's going out at 1:00 Eastern, and basically it's going to sort of rock Ottawa. And
It did.
It's got people talking right away. Now, some people will say, now what this does is it triggers an election. It triggers an early election. Not exactly,
No.
not necessarily, but what it does is it puts the Liberals in a position where they could lose a confidence vote at any moment.
Yeah.
And Pierre Poilievre, in response, was stepping in front of a microphone for different reasons. Pierre Poilievre's out campaigning full-time, as he would be. And, of course, everybody's wondering, well, what does he have to say about this? And he went on at length, first in French, then in English. We're going to pull a snippet for you, about a minute and a half, where he kind of cuts to the chase. But this is like slogans and rhyming and alliteration.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is Pierre Poilievre in full campaign mode responding to this. Now, some people are going to be saying, okay, so Jagmeet Singh did exactly what Pierre Poilievre asked him to do. And in a way, this is what Pierre Poilievre has been asking Jagmeet Singh to do, right? To basically hold Trudeau's feet to the fire, to let Canadians decide if this Liberal government deserves to stay in Ottawa. Remember, the next federal election is supposed to be, expected to be, about a year from now, next fall. But if the Liberals lose the votes in the House of Commons, well, then you know what happens next. So did Jagmeet Singh do what Pierre Poilievre asked him to do? Are the two of them getting friendly? Not exactly.
Sellout Singh has pulled a stunt. The Sellout Singh stunt today, where he came out and claimed that he was wrong, that the coalition was a bad, costly idea, but he refuses to commit to voting for a carbon tax election. So my message to Sellout Singh is this. If you're serious about ending your costly carbon tax coalition with Trudeau, then commit today to voting for a carbon tax election at the earliest confidence vote in the House of Commons. That way we can have a carbon tax election where Canadians will decide between the costly coalition of Trudeau and Sellout Singh that tax your food, punish your work, take your money, double your housing costs, and unleash crime and drugs on your street, or common sense conservatives who will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
So there you go. Mariah has awarded Pierre Poilievre a medal early in this show. She says he does win the alliteration award, and she bestows a gold medal in the YouTube live chat. I do agree, the Sellout Singh stunt. I don't know why he couldn't have got a little more serious about it. The silly Sellout Singh stunt, or the salacious and silly Sellout Singh stunt. But in all seriousness, Pierre Poilievre basically says, all right, so we're here now, so let's do this. And it makes sense that Pierre Poilievre would want to take Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, and everybody else into an election for obvious reasons.
Sure, yeah, of
I mean,
course.
look at what he's been doing with membership sales. Look what he's been doing with fundraising. Look what he's been doing in the media cycle. This is Angus Reid polling released within the last 24 hours or so. Polling happened over the past week or so. And you look at federal vote intent over time. This is with decided and leaning voters. Okay, so not the undecideds. But if you look at it right now, as of September 2024, the Conservatives have a wide margin right now. 43% of voters that have their minds made up or are leaning in a certain direction, 43% say they would vote for the Conservatives right now. 21% is that Liberal number, down from about 30% a year ago, 35% 18 months ago. And the NDP are just behind the Liberals at 19%. So 43 for the Conservatives, 21 for the governing Liberals, and 19 for the NDP, with the Bloc at 10 and the Greens at 5. You may look at this and suggest that Jagmeet Singh sees this as the must-jump moment, where his party's polling just below the Liberals.
Maybe,
and
yeah.
he figures, and the way that he's talking, I mean, you heard him there, the reason I'm running for Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I mean, the writ hasn't dropped. There's no election right now. The reason I'm running for Prime Minister is this. He says the Liberals cannot stop the Conservative cuts, but the NDP can. I think he's wanting to jump off that ship as the Liberals' unpopularity continues to rise, or to eliminate the double negative as their popularity continues to plummet. And also at the same time, I mean, there's other theories at play. Ken in our live chat right now points to these by-elections that are coming up. Right? He says that this is probably the NDP kind of putting themselves in a position there. He says they're to help their precarious position in the two by-elections coming up, but they won't trigger, he says, any election, and at least not until the spring. He says they're low in the polls and they need money. I mean, the NDP was looking at refinancing their mortgages on their property, because they were like out of money.
Yeah. Can I first say this video, the production, now you see the NDP taking a cue from Pierre Poilievre.
Sure.
The music in the background, the compelling images that they're throwing up, stock video that I'm sure they checked were all from Canada.
Right.
But really taking a cue from Pierre on this. And then on the flip side, Pierre getting caught off guard and doing just a regular speaking video, whereas they would have, if they knew this was coming a week ago, would have prepared something great. But I digress. I'll play devil's advocate. A lot of people saying, here we go, there's going to be an early election, Trudeau's gone, all of that. Yes, but politics, as we were talking about after this happened yesterday, is a chess game, and there's a budget coming up. And this could be a last hard power move by Singh and the NDP to say, hey, if this budget doesn't reflect exactly what we want coming up, you're done.
You're absolutely right.
We have to wait here.
So this is so the NDP could obviously and maybe will continue to support
They could
this budget.
flip-flop in 2 months.
Well, a lot of people look at this and say, hang on a second. I mean, Erica's in our live chat right now. She's trying to sort this out. She says trying to decide which of these three federal party leaders to support is like trying to find the clean end of a turd.
We're not in a good
Erica's
spot
helping
here.
us understand what it looks like out there, what the landscape looks like. But a lot of people are going, hang on a second. Jagmeet Singh's in a position to continue to press, to push, and to allow this Liberal government to continue to roll out programs like pharmacare, like dental care for low-income Canadians, and you can virtually guarantee that if Pierre Poilievre is elected, that a lot of these programs or a lot of these ideas are never going to make it to the next level, to the next phase. Canadians are never going to benefit from that.
Singh doesn't want Pierre as prime minister
Not a
any more
chance.
than he wants, he wants to continue this with Trudeau, but he wants to be the one holding the walking stick. He
Maybe
wants to
this
be
is
the
his
one with the
way-
power, right?
Maybe this is his way of reminding the Liberals about this agreement.
I think
that
it
they
is.
have,
I think it's a powerful
he's
chess
saying,
move.
He's saying this isn't an unconditional support agreement. This is now where the Liberals are going to have to work to get us on side every time they need us with every vote. I mean, the Bloc could come in and start doing deals with the Liberals, right?
Sure.
In theory, the Liberals can go out and find those numbers, but you have to assume that's less likely than what they've enjoyed. Liberal MP, Deputy Government House Leader Mark Garrettson tweeting about this. There hasn't been a lot of commentary on this. The Prime Minister hasn't really said a lot about this. He was trying to focus on the Bank of Canada's interest rate drop, that quarter-point drop that was announced right around the same time as Jagmeet's video dropped. But Mark Garrettson tweeting yesterday evening around 7 o'clock Eastern says, I clearly underestimated Jagmeet Singh. He allowed Pierre Poilievre to bully him into abandoning Canadians. Another year would have made a huge difference. Interesting to see Garrettson talking in past tense. Would have made a big difference. Instead of saying another year will make a big difference, he says another year would have made a huge difference. Now many are left wondering what the future holds for pharmacare, dental care, and a national school food program. That from Liberal MP Mark Garrettson. So that's the position that the party's taking, generally speaking. The question is, what does this mean for Canadians? And will we be having an election or seeing an election anytime soon, an early election?
Singh knows he'll get smoked by Pierre Poilievre. In the back of my mind, I'm like, what is this play? It's not a play to become prime minister. He knows that he has less of a chance than Trudeau does to beat Pierre and the Conservatives. So I honestly, in my heart, I'll play the devil's advocate, but I also believe that this is a last-ditch effort from Singh to gain some power and maybe even make Trudeau his whipping boy for if Trudeau gets reelected, right? Now the NDP has all the power. Now they're calling the shots. But, I mean, you know, God bless his heart, Singh, but we all know he can't defeat Pierre in the next election. So you have to wonder what the real angle is here, the real reason he's doing it. But, again, have you ever seen this happen, Ryan, where we're sitting here, we didn't hear a whiff of anything, and then a produced video? Usually when you're producing a video, something leaks somewhere in your cabinet. Somebody gives something away. This was out of the blue.
Yeah, it was. This is Denis wonders, by the way, how many social programs and rights will Pierre Poilievre eliminate under the guise of axe the tax? This is going to be the message from the Liberals right now, right? Like the message from the Liberals, this kind of puts Jagmeet Singh in an interesting position. And I see those of you that are in our chat right now asking about Singh's leadership status, right? A lot of people are not sold. And when I say a lot of people, and I don't speak on behalf of the federal NDP members at all, but you get the sense that a lot of folks that are pretty loyal to the federal NDP are not 100% convinced that Singh is their general, that Singh's the one that they want taking them into the next election. I see people talking about Rachel Notley right now in our live chat, wondering if that might be a good fit for her. But is the NDP leadership even signed, sealed, and delivered? Like, are people sold on that? That's another question. This could be a move that Singh's advisors or Singh himself believes is necessary to assert his own leadership, to show that he can be the guy, as opposed to even the party. Because then when it comes back to that polling, there's nothing convincing. And I say this respectfully to people that support that party, but there's nothing realistically. Like if you look at these numbers again, you can find them yourself at angusreid.org. This is polling that's just been released this week. Like, look at what the Conservatives have done, okay? About 3 years ago, let's say, so in November of 21, okay, about 3 years ago-ish, the Conservatives were at 29% support. Liberals were at 35%. Okay, they were tied about 6 months later in March of 22. And then the Conservatives have seen about an 8-point bump from there, while the Liberals have seen about a 14-point drop. So it's pretty clear where those two parties have gone. But look at the NDs. Like they had 20% voter support in November of 21, and they've got 19% today. They've never gone lower than 19, and they've never gone higher than 21. So they haven't moved. So they've not lost support, but they haven't gained any support. And I guess that there's a few different ways that you could look at that, but trend-wise, it's not as though Jagmeet sees that his party has the potential to surge, right? There have been these little bumps, but they keep getting dragged down by the Liberals. They haven't done a damn thing. No, they haven't lost ground, but they haven't gained any.
So you're saying another angle is maybe this is Singh showing some backbone and hoping that people see, and maybe nudging the arrow in the right.
Trudeau.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think he is. And while he didn't necessarily
but that's not going to be enough to beat Pierre. That's not going to give you 20 points. That's not going to bump you up to 40% or even get you close to where you need to be to win an election. So in my mind, I don't know. I don't know what the strategy is here, because honestly, I think we both thought there may be an NDP leadership change before the next election.
I'm not
now
convinced
it's definitely not going to
happen.
happen.
But I don't, like right now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the top of the list. And right now, I mean, this is Jagmeet's to lose as of today, and he's essentially, I mean, he's rattling his saber. Right?
Yeah.
Or he's throwing down the gauntlet, or whatever metaphor you want to use.
That video was pretty, for Singh, it was very, I mean, that's a complete 180. It's not like, hey, we disagree with this stuff, we're parting ways. He called him out. There are evil pictures of Trudeau there in black and white. This thing had a soundtrack. But
yet at the meantime, you always hope when you sort of like demolish one relationship that you're doing it to fix the other one, like but there's no alignment between Poilievre.
Now you're on your own.
and Singh,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you look at Jagmeet Singh didn't find favor for even 5 minutes with Pierre Poilievre, calling him sellout Singh, describing the entire thing as a stunt. He didn't gain any favor with him there, nor is he trying to. What he's trying to do is establish and position himself, Jagmeet Singh that is, as the guy to go head-to-head against Pierre Poilievre. And I just realistically, calling a spade, don't think Canadians will buy it. They didn't buy it 3 years ago. They didn't buy it 1 year ago. Nobody's talking about it, and they're not going to buy it now.
No.
So ultimately, what does this do? I'm sure that there's going to be a meeting today. I'm sure that there already has been a phone call or text messages exchanged. Actually, nobody does text anymore because they don't want to get screen grabbed. But
Slack.
Slack, WhatsApp with the Prime Minister and Mr. Singh and their teams. I'm sure that there's talking happening around what does this mean. And this is probably Jagmeet Singh ultimately trying to position his party to get more of what it wants in the next budget. But it's interesting nonetheless. So I don't think this means an early election immediately. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think that that's where this is going because I think Jagmeet Singh, despite what he's saying in that video, knows exactly what would happen.
He's got a trick up his sleeve. That's what I have to believe. Or I have to believe that he's just very... He's just not intelligent. And that's not how things work. He has a team. There's got to be a play here. There's got to be something. And I agree with you. I think him and Trudeau and their teams are talking right now about how or what that move is.
Justin says Poilievre has to use the stupid nicknames so his voters will remember who not to vote for. Kenzie says, so this has nothing to do with the immense pressure on Singh to drop the coalition then? Yeah, but Kenzie, who's the pressure coming from? The pressure's coming from the Conservatives. And why does Jagmeet Singh give a shit about what Pierre Poilievre says or where the pressure's coming from with the Conservatives, right? I get what you're saying. Pierre Poilievre has been challenging Jagmeet Singh to drop this, as he's called it, the costly coalition, right? To drop this for years, sure. But do you particularly care about pressure coming from somebody whose opinion you give no rips about? Yeah. Not really. I haven't seen a lot of pressure coming from NDP insiders, NDP voters, or NDP MPs for them to walk away from this agreement, this supply and confidence agreement. Strikes me as though they're in a position to actually get some work done on things that they've made their own priorities, things like dental care for lower income Canadians, for pharmacare as well. I mean, how about that interaction with the Prime Minister and that steel worker just the other day? I don't know if you saw that. I didn't pull the video, but the Prime Minister is doing kind of a meet and greet, a photo op in front of a steel facility, and one of the workers comes up and kind of takes him on. Basically says, it's I'm paying this much in taxes. It's still costing my family money to go see the dentist, et cetera, et cetera. And you look at the messaging, the response the Prime Minister had there, and you look at what he was talking about yesterday. He's trying to keep people focused on the stuff they're doing. Sure. He's trying to keep people focused on where interest rates are going. The economy's recovering. They're doing what they can to build as many houses as they can. They're doing what they can to introduce dental care for low-income Canadians. This is what they got to do. They got to look at their track record, because if you start getting in a mudslinging match with Pierre Poilievre, I think they're going to lose.
But even look at that exchange, which, a lot of people say he got owned. Really? I heard him answer every question. I heard him have some sort of almost solution for everything the steel worker was talking about when he was addressing the Prime Minister. Do you think Singh is going to be that quick when one of those workers or somebody who opposes the NDP comes up to him? He's just not. So, and that's, that's just the feeling I got. That's the feeling everyone gets. That's why this number 20% or whatever you've been talking about, 20 points, has stayed the way it has for 2 years, right? So I just because you stop holding someone's hand in a coalition doesn't mean you still can't vote their way on budgets 100%. And on policy.
Yeah,
so
this could just be a reminder.
I think this is just a bit of a, I don't want to say the B slap word. It's a backhand. I was going to say B-I-T-C-H.
I think you can say
slap.
Bitch slap. Anybody can be bitch slap.
It is.
Anybody can deliver a bitch slap.
It's a last ditch before budget. Hey, are you going to go our way on this? Because you said you would, and you haven't a lot.
Maybe he didn't feel like he was getting where he needed to get behind the scenes, and so he decided to take it public. Travis says, I love this delusion that the Conservatives' popularity has anything to do with policies or likability. It's the same thing as always. Canadians get tired of the same party being in power.
Wow, 100%.
That's probably an element. But yeah,
100%.
I think there's an element to that for sure. I definitely don't think that it's because of Pierre Poilievre's popularity, though he's very popular with his supporters. I don't think it has much to do with policy, because we just haven't seen a lot from policy at this point anyway. People start asking for a little bit more on the campaign trail, but then I see some cynicism around that too. Ken says, this next election federally, It will be similar to the most recent Alberta election. Says Poilievre probably won't run on most of his ideas when he has power, or maybe Ken Means won't deliver on them. Says that's just not good strategy. He'll run on the spaghetti that's stuck to the wall. I see what you're saying, Ken. There, others are basically saying that this sort of puts the NDP in a position to maybe actually weaken itself. Plain Power's back in the chat. Says Jagmeet shows how disconnected he is from the average person. His leadership review will likely result in him quitting. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Who is the average person anyway? When we talk about politics, the average person, it's tough to describe the average person, isn't it?
But I agree. That comment I said 100%. I agree wholeheartedly. I think if you look at the same person's face sitting in the big chair for a decade or more, or close to a decade, you're going to want to change no matter what. And Kenzie agreeing with me in the chat, but I'm saying this. I think just because you're not holding hands, just because you're not in a coalition, doesn't mean you can't vote on policy and budget still the same way the Liberals want to. The NDP can still go along. I just think because this thing was so overproduced, Ryan, I just think it's like a stunt.
Was it overproduced?
The video, the music.
Did you think the music was a little much?
And some of the pictures of Trudeau that were, it clearly this is like a page right from Pierre Poilievre's handbook. Like the pictures of Trudeau in black and white, making him look scary and all this stuff. Like that is not something the NDP does.
You
right?
got to be kind of careful too. And by careful, what I mean is like you've got to be aware of how it's going to influence public perception when you release a video like this and nothing drastic happened overnight. In other words, like, Justin Trudeau didn't get caught sort of like accepting a manila envelope with, stacks of cash in it. There wasn't a moment where he's like in handcuffs over an RCMP cruiser for driving under the influence. There wasn't like a moment that something dramatic and immediate happened with the Prime Minister.
Timing was weird.
So you go, hang on a second. So to Jagmeet Singh, you were cool up until like 5 minutes ago.
Tuesday.
You were cool up until Tuesday. And then all of a sudden now we are to believe that this guy is absolutely incompetent, terrible, bad for the country, unable to, maintain his position of leadership. He's lost your confidence completely, right? Like you said, like with the really harsh words, the black and white treated video of the Prime Minister. It's kind of like, well, first of all, how long have you felt this way? And if you felt this way for a while, why didn't you say something sooner?
How long have you had this in the canon?
Now we may say, this comes across as looking a little opportunistic for the NDP. Baby, politics is nothing but opportunism. And that's exactly what it is. And it's opportunity and it's timing and it's seizing those moments and it's who gains and loses ground. So we'll be paying close attention to obviously what happens over the next week or so, what Justin Trudeau says about this, if anything. I'm sure he's going to be asked about it quite frequently. There's some talk in here, and I've seen people say this. One of my buddies texted me this the other day. People saying that the steel worker, they don't think it was a real steel worker. They think it was a plant. They think it was a planted worker.
No, it wasn't.
Hang on a second.
He's been.
Don't you think that there were other workers standing there in hard hats? Don't you think one of them would have said, "Who the fuck is this guy?"
Exactly.
Don't you think someone would have said something if he was a plant?
He looks similar to some conservative guy who runs. I don't know what it is. Anyways, it's been debunked, whatever. He is a real steel worker who did work at that plant, and it's been confirmed.
I'm seeing some people say some nasty things about the steel worker in the chat. Why are we attacking the steel worker? I
thought he was pretty, compared to most people who yell at Trudeau, I thought he was pretty polite.
He didn't make a threat of violence. He didn't say that he should be in jail. He didn't put his hands on him. He didn't listen. The guy absolutely disagrees with Justin Trudeau, and there was like a palpable kind of there was like a something in his voice where you're just like, this guy can't stand the Prime Minister.
But
that's fine.
No F-bombs, nothing like that.
Didn't raise his voice. He said a few now he did say a few things that were kind of questionable. Like he talked about what percentage of taxes he's paying, which would indicate that he's making pretty decent money. But then he starts complaining about that he had to pay $50 to go to the dentist. Like there was some stuff like that where I guess if we're hashing this out on a show like this, or if you're talking with your friends, you might $50 to go.
I went last month. It was not $50.
Look at your teeth. But anyway, but I digress. But like we could get into the weeds on that. That's not what the Prime Minister wants to do. He doesn't want to get in the weeds. But I thought the guy made a couple quick points. The guy reiterated Pierre Poilievre's talking points, right? So this is what we can expect to see. The Prime Minister is obviously prepared to speak to that, or at least he better be. If he's not, he has no business being the Prime Minister. I think Trudeau, quite frankly, is pretty good on his feet. You can check out his interview with us on February 21st, 35 minutes, freewheeling, no advanced questions, no notes on what we were going to talk about. I thought he's pretty, agree with him, like him or not, disagree with him, wherever you stand on it. 35 minutes, I thought he was pretty good.
And he was good in this exchange
and he's got to be
worker.
in campaign mode because he's got to be ready for moments like that. If you're putting, especially a prime minister that's experiencing some issues with population, he's in, generally speaking, over the course of his tenure, almost a decade as prime minister, he's not used to being, if you look at his body of work, so to speak, he's been more popular than less, right? So he's not used to being, if the NDP overtakes the Liberals in polling next time around, Trudeau's not used to being in third place. He hasn't been there for 10 years.
And I think he's been doing his homework. Are you noticing there's less ahs, stuttering? As soon as these questions were asked from him from the steelworker, he had an answer to everyone immediately.
I'm not saying he's not in trouble. I'm not saying the Liberals aren't in trouble. I'm just saying I think he's ready to take
I think he's been
criticism.
training.
I think he's figuring out, or they maybe already know, he and his team, what they're going to be focusing on when criticized. Like Poilievre, we played you, I don't know, a minute and a half of what he had to say. If you go back, you can easily find it online. It's on his Twitter. You can find his full address. And he starts hammering down on the stuff that he says Conservatives will do. He says he's going to get Canadian streets back to serene status, which I thought was kind of funny. But he's focused on crime. He's focused on drugs, obviously. You see the language, the supercharged language around BC's drug pilot, which they've since pulled back. We've covered that at length. And he's talking a lot about Conservatives will get those houses built. I say this optimistically, but I'll believe that when I see it. I think everybody's trying to figure out how they can get these houses built because there's no doubt a housing crisis, a real housing crunch in this country, no matter where you live. And people are having a really tough time right now, regardless of that quarter-point drop in the federal lending rate as well. Let us know what you think about this talk at ryanjesperson.com. After this quick break, we're going to get into it on a subject that I know is of utmost importance and huge relevance. It's a sensitive subject, to be sure, but with many of you, medical assistance in dying, very few people in Canada and around the world know more about this or have seen more real life examples of how this is impacting Canadians than our next guest, Reanne Booker, who's going to join us right after I remind you about the support of this episode that's coming from partners of ours like California Closets, experts in custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. That California Closets can help you make the most of your space with custom organizational systems, whether you're talking about an entertainment center in your family's living room, or maybe that TV room downstairs. Maybe you're looking to overhaul your boot room, get all that footwear organized. It could be a laundry room of your dreams, a second bedroom, a home office, or even your garage. The cost of your custom designed closet is something that their designers are going to figure out with you based on your budget. They have all kinds of different personalized solutions. And that first consultation, of course, is free. You can book it today at californiaclosets.ca. A big congratulations to our friends at Vine Arts. Whether you live in Calgary or Edmonton, chances are you visited a Vine Arts. I love their 17th Ave location in Calgary, but we're talking about 124th Street in Edmonton. They're getting set to celebrate their first birthday. It's coming up on the 14th of September, and I want to invite you to join them there on 124th Street, just north of 109th Ave. A beautiful store. They're going to have snacks. They're going to have samples of wine and beer and spirits and a chance to win great prizes, plus a 15% off sale you're not going to want to miss. Johnny, I was telling you what I love most about how they organize their wines. Instead of being like Italy or France, they organize their wines by flavor profile. So with their reds, you can so you can choose like light and fresh.
Wine for dummies.
Or I like this,
I love
spicy, earthy, and funky.
Amazing.
And then they'll have red wines from all different countries that fit that flavor profile. I just go straight to the whites for June, July, and August, that crisp and refreshing section. That's where I've been spending all my allowance. But they have rich and creamy whites, you name it. Find more details at vinearts.ca. Don't forget, September 14th. I know. Creamy wine, it is a thing. It is a thing. They can explain it to you. Their team at Vine Arts on September 14th. 1 year old. And at McBain Camera, they've got a big announcement as well. In Edmonton's Mayfield Square out in the West End, this thing has been under construction for a while. Now it's wide open, a beautiful, beautiful gathering place for photography enthusiasts. And we want to remind you that coming up this weekend, they're celebrating their grand opening tent event. It's Saturday, September 7th from 10 to 4, including an outdoor trade show. I love this, featuring all the photo industry's biggest heavy hitters, including Nikon. Come see that new Nikon Z6. The 3, that full-frame mirrorless camera that all photographers I know have had on their radar. They've got that flagship Z9 and the latest Z-series lenses, plus more than $10,000 in door prizes to be given away, including a Nikon Z30 camera kit. How great is that? That's this weekend, the 7th of September from 10 to 4. You can learn more at mcbaincamera.com/grand opening. Well, the numbers show that many Canadians are choosing medical assistance in dying, more of them every single year. And that trend applies across the country. Access to MAiD is an issue that's being discussed in particular in certain provinces. It's flared up in Alberta over the past week or so with Premier Danielle Smith's announcement that she's considering pulling hospitals from AHS and giving them to Covenant Care. Of course, Covenant Care, a Catholic operator, does not offer medical assistance in dying. So it's put this issue back in front of Albertans. But people across the country are talking about this as it was legalized in Canada, one of the first nations in the world to do it. We've seen more uptake, and I think it's fair to say we've seen the stigma around medical assistance in dying drop as well. But it's not completely gone. And it's not always a fact-fueled conversation when we're talking about people's end-of-life choices. Reanne Booker is an oncology and palliative care nurse practitioner with more than 2 decades of experience in cancer care. She's a PhD candidate in the School of Nursing at the University of Victoria, and the focus of that research is the integration of palliative care in oncology. Reanne's the immediate past president of the Canadian Association of Nurses in Oncology, and we're so grateful that she's made time for us today. Welcome back to the show. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Just to preface this, as you already mentioned, Ryan, I think that, we might talk about some difficult things today. So if people need to seek support, there's help at 988.ca, or each of the major centers in Alberta has a distress center as well. So I know some of this discussion can be a little sensitive and difficult to talk about. And I also want to apologize. One of my kiddos took my earbuds, so I don't have those. So I hope the sound quality is okay.
The sound quality is absolutely fantastic. And I really appreciate the spirit that you're coming into this conversation with. We have an email I'm going to read to you and to our audience in just a little bit from Leslie. When she heard that you were coming on the show, she sent us a beautiful and difficult message about her family's journey. And as we've seen in our recent conversations with Dr. Paul Parks last week, with Senator Paula Simons, with columnist Tristan Hopper, every time we've talked about this, we've received feedback from people who are either living this journey right now, they're walking these difficult steps right now, they have walked this journey, or they see this coming as part of their future. We heard from another family with a beloved family member living with ALS right now and having difficult conversations around this. So it's not lost on me that some people, this may be their very first episode of this show that they're ever hearing, and they're tuning in to hear conversation about this.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we've seen an increase in the requests for MAiD and also the provision of MAiD. So that's the procedure itself, and since it became legal in 2016. So since 2019 in particular, there's been a 30% year-over-year increase, with the most recent data showing that in 2022, there were more than 13,000 people who requested and underwent MAiD. The reasons for that, I think, are being debated. Some of it is, as you mentioned, there's an increasing awareness, a reduction in the stigma. There are more MAiD providers and assessors in the country, so it's a little bit more accessible than it was initially. And I think there's a growing acceptance and recognition that people desire a sense of autonomy and control at end of life. I think that option for some people is a really good option. It's not for everyone. And I recognize that there are some religious nuances and other reasons why people may not want medical assistance in dying, and that's perfectly acceptable. But where people do desire that option, it is a legal option for those who are eligible.
When you look at these numbers, people can find them, we'll link to them in the show notes, but they're readily available from the Government of Canada, canada.ca. The number of deaths in Canada with medical assistance, as you mentioned, in 2018, just about 4,500. In 2020, just about 7,500. 2021, just over 10,000. 2022, about 13,250, and that's the most recent numbers that we have. Is it possible to read too much into those numbers and extrapolate? This was not something that was available to Canadians 10 years ago. This is something that fewer Canadians were talking about or didn't have access to even 3 or 4 years ago. What do you read into those numbers, or how do those numbers land with you?
Yeah, I think that there's been debate in the literature and even amongst those of us in healthcare about the reasons why there's been an increase. And some of it is, as you said, it's a procedure or an option that wasn't available prior to 2016. So I think it's natural to expect there'll be an increase in the first few years. We've in Canada seen a more steady increase, I would say, than other countries. The Netherlands still remains, I would say, the leaders in that regard. Their total deaths, 5.1% are assisted deaths. In Canada, we're just over 4% now. And there are many other jurisdictions around the world as well that are now allowing assisted dying in some way, shape, or form. So I think it's important to also clarify there are two different types of assisted death available in Canada. So one would be the clinician administered, where the clinician would administer a substance intravenously that would bring about the death of the person. And then there is the other option where the clinician provides a prescription and the patient takes the substance themselves. Most of the MAiD deaths in Canada are the first option, so clinician administered. And there are different reasons for that. Some people, it's just their preference that they would rather someone else do it. But there can also be concerns with the prescription version where someone takes it themselves. Typically, it's a liquid substance. There can be variable absorption. There can be concerns if there's any vomiting. It can be a little bit more difficult to predict how long it will take. And so those are reasons I think that compel people to choose the clinician administered option.
I want to ask you about, there was kind of a high profile story. You're familiar, I'm sure, with Canadian veteran Kelsey Sharon, who recently did an interview with Jordan Peterson. The BC Catholic wrote about it as Ms. Sharon talks about her mission returning from war to take on MAiD. She describes it to Jordan Peterson, to Dr. Peterson, as taking on Canada's MAiD culture. What do you think a high-profile conversation like this one does to the bigger public conversation about this issue in Canada?
Well, I think I've mentioned this to you before. I appreciate all sides of debate. And I think that Ms. Sharon has, profiled medical assistance in dying, and dying more broadly, I think, is something we don't talk about very much in our culture.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that that's been brought up. Unfortunately, I think there were some, and I've seen a few interviews she's done. So on her channel, I think there are 3 at least videos that she's done, interviews that she's done pertaining to MAiD. There are some inaccuracies and inconsistencies with the Canadian legislation in what she's talked about. In particular, the sequence of medications given. She likened a death by medical assistance in dying to waterboarding, and that's simply untrue. It just it doesn't happen that way. So she discussed that a paralytic is given first, and under no protocols in Canada is that the way it's done. So there's a sedative given first typically, and then a very strong coma-inducing drug, usually something like propofol, and then the paralytic would be the last medication given. So in my experience and the provisions that I've been at, it is very peaceful and it's very quick. So I think that was perhaps a myth that I'd like to dispel in some of her interviews, is just, that piece of, I would say, misinformation. So not, and again, Tim Caulfield will speak about this a lot, that misinformation and disinformation. I think misinformation is unintentionally providing maybe inaccurate information. I don't think she was intentional in providing that information incorrectly. But I do think, again, as you mentioned, she's high profile. She gets a lot of views. And And I appreciate that it's brought some of this stuff into the forefront, into the spotlight, so we can have these discussions about dying in Canada. And the veteran cases as well, they're along those lines. There's a case in the media about people feeling pressured. One case of somebody looking for supports in terms of, I think it was assistive equipment, wheelchairs, and the like, and purportedly being offered MAiD as an alternative. And I think that, for me, I've always been very supportive as MAiD as a choice for people, but MAiD should never replace or be an alternative to quality healthcare, including palliative care, end-of-life care, quality, comprehensive symptom management. So that piece for sure. And we're hearing little bits and pieces in the media and social media about some of these cases where perhaps there are some socio-demographic issues and some structural vulnerabilities that are perhaps compelling people to choose MAiD. Again, that would not be consistent with the current legislation. So people have to qualify, and the criteria are quite clear. And if people are not abiding by the criteria as assessors, and typically it's not typical, it's mandatory. People have to have 2 independent assessments. So it can be a physician or a nurse practitioner, but those 2 assessors have to determine that the person is eligible. The criteria are very clear. So, and as of right now, the person has to have a grievous and irremediable condition. They have to be eligible for health services within Canada. So typically visitors would not be eligible. So again, we have seen in the past people travel to other countries to have MAiD or assisted death. That is not permitted in Canada right now. People have to be 18 or older. So that, again, is a myth I've seen on Twitter, where children are being offered MAiD, and that is not permitted under the current legislation. Somebody has to make a voluntary request for MAiD that is not the result of undue pressure or coercion, and they have to give informed consent. And I think the last 2 points are probably a little bit contentious. So again, I think we need to ensure that people have free choice and that they're not feeling pressured. And if they're in situations where there are structural vulnerabilities and they're feeling like MAiD is the only option, I think as a society, we have an obligation to make sure we're supporting people so that they're not choosing MAiD in a situation where they otherwise wouldn't. So, right now, again, the grievous and irremediable condition, we've probably heard in the media that, and in the healthcare settings, that MAiD as an option for somebody with a mental health as a sole underlying medical condition was set to be approved in March of this year, but it's now been deferred to March 2027. And so there are some issues there too. It's quite contentious. And even amongst the psychiatric community, there's, I would say, discordant views in terms of if MAiD should be permitted for people whose sole underlying medical condition is a mental health condition. And part of the concern with that is, again, access to quality mental health services. Psychotherapy being a mainstay of treatment for mental health conditions, that is not available to everybody. So it's something that many people, even if you have insurance, there often are limits or caps to how much you can spend per year on psychotherapy. But a good number of people don't have any support or financial assistance for psychotherapy at all. We think about especially people in rural and remote areas. Again, the thought around, or the criteria and the legislation around permitting MAiD for sole underlying a mental health condition is that they need to be able to have access to care. They don't have to necessarily accept the treatment that's offered, but they ought to have at least an awareness and conversations around what's available. And then at least one of the 2 assessors should be an expert in that person's mental health condition. And so again, that's going to be problematic probably because we have limits on the number of psychiatrists across the country, and there are already wait lists for people even within the urban centers, but even more so for the rural and remote areas.
Were you paying attention at all to this? This is just a tough story out of Calgary. This father and daughter, his daughter 27, was basically starving herself. I guess in a way of her own protest around being blocked by a judge's order to access MAiD. Her father was challenging in court her wishes to access MAiD. It's you can I don't you know they've only been identified, the dad as WV, she as MV. She's 27 years old. Her only known diagnoses are autism and ADHD, but she's chosen medical assistance in dying. Her dad was taking it to court. I don't know the details. I don't know the family. I know what I see on the surface, and I can imagine like a father's love for his daughter and desperately wanting her to be here, and then who knows, walking miles in the daughter's shoes of why this is her personal choice for herself, right? And this, but going before the courts, it goes before the Court of Appeal. She goes on sort of a starvation strike. The dad drops his appeal. It's just like, what a situation playing out in front of the courts and playing out in news coverage. I imagine you were paying attention to that one.
Yeah, and I have a huge amount of compassion and empathy for both sides.
Totally.
For sure. And, like you say, we don't know all the details. So there probably are some details in her medical history that were never made public. Again, as per the current legislation, there are 2 tracks now for MAiD as of March 2021. Somebody does not need to have a condition where death is reasonably foreseeable. So when the MAiD legislation was first approved, death needed to be reasonably foreseeable. So again, we don't have a crystal ball, but for example, in the cancer care world, you can look at serial imaging like CT scans. You can see objective progression of disease, and that can tell you, to some degree, prognostic uncertainty is always a challenge, but that will tell you to some degree that disease is progressing, and death therefore is reasonably foreseeable. Track 2 now allows for people who have serious and incurable, again, that grievous and irremediable suffering, that they're now permitted to apply for medical assistance in dying. There are some different safeguards there, so they have to wait a minimum of 90 days from the time of their request to the time of provision. Again, there's a recommendation that one of the assessors needs to be an expert in the condition or conditions the person has, or if not, they need to at least consult with an expert. So that makes it a little bit more tricky for sure. And I definitely appreciate that families can have some concerns. So again, in that particular case, I think there was probably some details that we didn't hear about. As it was presented in the media, it didn't seem like it would fit necessarily with the legislation, but I can tell you as assessors and providers, we need to be very cautious, because if we don't abide by the criteria, it could be a criminal code charge. It's serious. And so I think you'll find that most, if not all, I would say arguably all, assessors and providers are very careful about following the criteria to a T, and we have to submit very detailed documentation in that regard as well. In my experience, when I've done assessments in that, I always do try to get a sense of what the family's thoughts are as well. Even if the family's not there, I ask, is everyone kind of on the same page about this? Or are there disparate views? Or is anybody really opposed? Now, that wouldn't preclude MAiD from going forward, but that would maybe signal to me that it'd be a good idea to see if we can get some supports in place for the family and maybe answer some questions that they might have. For the most cases I've been involved with, I would say family members are supportive. It's a weird thing to plan somebody's expiration date, as some patients and families have said. There can be almost like this feeling of a death countdown, which is a very strange idea. But a lot of family members, when you think about the alternative, they don't want to see their loved ones suffer. They don't want to see protracted, prolonged dying and suffering. And so most families, in my experience, have been very supportive. In the rare exceptions, I would say those are families we probably need to support more. And there is now a MAiD Family Society support network in Alberta, which is great. But that particular case was challenging. And there have been a few others across the country that are similar as well, where the family members have been taken aback or caught unaware, or just not in agreement with their loved one having gone through medical assistance in dying.
We're talking to Reanne Booker, who's an oncology and palliative care nurse practitioner. Want to jump into the YouTube live chat here, give obviously our audience a vote here. Akat says, I'm chronically ill, and it's disturbing to see how people would rather die than be disabled. Personal opinion there. Tracy says there needs to be a lot more open discussion about death and dying in general. Tracy, I totally agree with you. Says it doesn't have to be something that is so feared or stigmatized. Denny says the failure of healthcare will force more people to consider MAiD. Plain Power, sharing a personal story, says if my mom were of sound mind, she would have chosen MAiD. Instead, she's alive with dementia. She's existing. Says her personal directive from 2009 didn't have that option. You know, right now her reality weekly, she's tearing off her colostomy bag. She doesn't understand it. It's really rough seeing her suffer. This is the position that a lot of families and a lot of people are in.
Yeah, and I think those comments really show you how nuanced this is. So again, I will emphasize that I think people should have choice, and that this should never be something obviously that is coerced or forced or anything, to the point that, you know, a crumbling healthcare system could compel people to choose MAiD. That scares me and worries me and should worry all of us.
Yep.
I think the comment also about MAiD for certain conditions and diminishing the value of life, and particularly this has come up in the community of people who are you know, experience disabilities, that, you know, if we're saying that they qualify, certain conditions qualify for MAiD, does that diminish the value of their life? And I think that is a very personal choice, and I can appreciate that perhaps they feel, you know, that there's this societal perception. I really hope that, you know, we could do something to assuage that perception. But I think that MAiD is definitely very personal. Really, I think only the person going through the experience can determine, or ought to determine, what quality of life means to them. And I will say there's a lot we can do for physical suffering. There's a lot we can do for symptom management. In cancer care, we've come such a long way in terms of all the different symptoms that arise. In Canada, most and around the world, other jurisdictions, the reason for people selecting or choosing MAiD is very often reasons other than symptoms. So, you know, they're concerned, or they've experienced a loss in, you know, activities that bring meaning or joy to their life. Maybe, you know, as the disease progresses, often, again, in the case of cancer, somebody might become confined to a bed or a chair for all of their waking hours, and so fatigued and quality of life so diminished that they're not deriving any joy from life anymore. And those are the reasons that often compel the decision to pursue MAiD. And those are inexorably more difficult to fix. There's no pill, there's no medication that can get somebody back to, you know, climbing a mountain or skiing or doing those kinds of things. If those were really important to them, those activities, and suddenly they can't do them, you know, that's very difficult. Symptom management wise, I agree. There's lots we can do. And I, again, as a palliative care clinician, I think that, you know, that needs to be explored fully. Now, that doesn't mean that someone has to choose or undergo the recommendations that we make. So again, some people will say, I don't want to be sedated towards the end of my life. I don't want to be so drugged up that I can't meaningfully participate in conversations with my loved one, or family members and friends and the like. So I think, you know, again, it's a balance, and everybody's experience will be different. You know, I think of some of the really difficult situations where, you know, cancer sometimes can, in the case of lung cancer, which is the top cancer diagnosis of people who've undergone MAiD, there can sometimes be tumors that compress the airway. So if you can imagine, you know, the feeling of suffocation or profound shortness of breath, that's terrifying.
Shri, we've got a message here from Shri in our live chat. She says, if some of the people that oppose MAiD have watched somebody die drowning in their own body fluids and in pain, they might feel differently about medical assistance in dying. I mean, that's one example. I honestly, I don't think that, and I'm not saying you're trying to do this. We're never going to have a conversation on this show that's like, is MAiD right or wrong? You know, is MAiD the right choice for everybody? Is MAiD inherently, you know what I mean? That's not the point. That's not, we don't discuss any other intimate angle or application of healthcare delivery in that way, ever. And I don't think it fits in this way either.
No, and I would agree with that even I, as somebody who supports the right for someone to choose MAiD, I agree that it's very nuanced, and people, you know, there's two sides to that for sure.
Yeah.
But again, I think as the comment, you know, if you've seen somebody suffering and there is an alternative to that, and there again are many other alternatives too. So I think it's very important that people have the opportunity, they have access to quality, comprehensive palliative care. Again, a bit more problematic in rural and remote areas. But I think, in most cases, we can do a lot to alleviate suffering. In not all cases can we do that, though. So I think having MAiD as an option allows for more autonomy and choice and control at a time when people have lost so much control, particularly, in the case of advanced disease and at end of life. I do want to also comment about the covenant care and the faith-based.
I want to ask you about that. That's a huge story in Alberta this week. Can I ask? Can we keep you like 10 more minutes? Do you have that flexibility?
Yes.
Okay, because we're gonna get right into that. That's a big story in Western Canada right now. We're talking to Reanne Booker, who's joining us, a palliative care nurse practitioner. She's earning her PhD. She's very close to being Dr. Booker on the integration of palliative care in oncology, in cancer care. By the way, she mentioned MAiD Family Supports as well. If you're listening on the podcast in particular, you can check out maidfamilysupport.ca. We're showing it to you for our YouTube audience. More with Reanne Booker in just a quick second. This conversation is happening with the support of partners like our friends at Friesen Brothers. This is a family-owned business that understands community, and we have seen that. We've seen them walking the walk along with you, real talkers that are Friesen Brothers customers that took us up on that invitation to make a $5 donation to the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade when you were at the till buying your groceries at Friesen Brothers, when you're buying that food at Friesen Brothers. And we were thrilled to make the announcement on behalf of Friesen Brothers earlier this week. Thanks to folks like you, $100,000 donated at the till. Friesen Brothers matching that with another $50,000, which means that they were able to. I'm imagining, Johnny, that must have been their team from the Hinton store.
Yeah.
Some of their Hinton Friesen Brothers staffers that headed out there and were able to present that big check for $150,000.
Love those big checks.
Isn't that fantastic?
Love
to
them.
the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. Thanks to all of you that contributed. Don't forget, Friesen Brothers in 17 Alberta locations. Alberta grown and Alberta owned. At Kubi Renewable Energy, they're looking to add team members to their roster in Lethbridge, in Kamloops, in Calgary, and in Edmonton. You could be working across Western Canada in a bunch of different applications. Kubi Renewable Energy is the busiest solar installer in the West. That includes BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, Saskatchewan. Whether you're looking for residential, commercial, industrial, or agricultural solar power, they've got the experience. And they're going to do it in a way that nobody else does. That's the Kubi advantage. You can learn more and check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca. And our friends at Complete Care Restoration, speaking of Jasper, want to remind you that they've got a quarter century of experience restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. A lot of their team members, these are certified technicians, people that have seen it all when it comes to disaster restoration. They're out there helping rebuild Jasper as we speak, and they're ready to respond 24/7 in your community as well. You can contact them by visiting completecarerestoration.ca. Reanne Booker, our guest, an oncology and palliative care nurse practitioner, as we talk about medical assistance in dying. Reanne, as you alluded to it, Premier Danielle Smith's, I guess, what do you want to call it? I mean, she put Alberta Health Services on notice about a week and a half ago, said that she's considering, they've already done it in Lacrete, and they're looking at pulling more hospitals away from the administration of Alberta Health Services. They say that they'll hand them over to a Catholic-run Covenant Health, which will have implications on reproductive health services and on other services, including access to MAiD. Obviously, that's something that falls right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, and it's something I'm quite concerned about. There are, as I understand, 17 Covenant Care sites across the province right now, and there is this potential that more sites could be managed by Covenant Care. Covenant Care has a policy about medical assistance in dying where they will not provide nor explicitly refer for MAiD. Given, as they say, the incompatibility of MAiD with the organization's mission and ethical tradition. It's problematic. This is MAiD is a legal option for eligible Canadians to alleviate suffering. And, it's not something that would be offered in a Covenant Care facility. I've had experience where I've assessed somebody for MAiD, found them to be eligible, and they were in a Covenant Care facility. And for provision of MAiD, they had to be transferred off site. as you can imagine, at end of life, even a trip to the bathroom can be very distressing and painful and challenging. So, to be transferred off site at that juncture is, to me, it's really inhumane. There is a lawsuit going on in BC right now against Providence Health, I believe, by the family of a young woman who was transferred out of a Vancouver hospital, again, a faith-based institution. And she was in so much pain during the transfer that she had to be sedated. So her family and loved ones had to say goodbye to her even before the transfer, not really at the moment or moments before provision, which was what they had, I think, intended or desired. You mentioned Senator Paula Simons. She had written a piece back in 2016 regarding forced transfers, and she had stated that if Covenant Care elected not to follow the law and not offer a legal option to eligible Canadians, then Covenant Care can no longer or should no longer run public hospitals with public funds. And, I agree with that. I think if a private institution wants to decide which services they provide, that's perfectly fine and acceptable. But if they're accepting public funding, and Covenant Care does accept a lot of public funding, then I think they have an obligation to provide the same services as the other institutions in Alberta would. You may have caught the interview with Health Minister Adriana LaGrange and Shay Ghanem earlier this week. I think it was on Tuesday. Where Mr. Ghanem asked about, again, this potential handover to Covenant Care and the impact on availability of services such as reproductive health and MAiD. And it sounds like they're, as you said, Lacrete has already transitioned over to Covenant Care. Regarding medical assistance in dying, Mr. LaGrange made a comment about there already being limits across the province, and that even within AHS-run hospitals, clinicians can have a conscientious objection to providing MAiD, so they don't necessarily need to be involved. And that's true. That certainly can happen if somebody is, objecting to it on a moral or religious background. They're not compelled to participate. But that's very different than an entire institution not permitting it whatsoever. Again, patients could be assessed, and certainly I will say Covenant Care does allow assessments for eligibility for MAiD to occur on premises, but they don't allow the provision. So the procedure itself isn't permitted. We could have the MAiD care team. It need not be any Covenant Care staff providing MAiD on site. It could be completely different staff providing MAiD. So this to me is still problematic, forcing people to be transferred at that very delicate, difficult, phase of their life, I think is really unfair.
Yeah, problematic is one word. I think unacceptable is probably another word. Interesting. Bunny Slippers in our chat says anybody who thinks this is regulated suicide is a complete fool, and I'm a practicing Catholic, says Bunny Slippers. I see other people, Sharon here, who's let us know, by the way, Sharon's sister works as a death doula. What a fascinating, what a calling that is. I mean, actually, I'm going to ask you about your job and the job of death doulas and others in just a moment. That to me is not a job. That is a calling. But Sharon in all caps says it's not suicide. Meaning well, when I talked to Tristan Hopper earlier this summer, I think it was in second week of July. People can check our archives. The episode is called Why More and More Canadians Are Choosing MAiD. I called it medically assisted suicide. And I got a note from somebody to talk at ryanjesperson.com, written like calmly, like nice note. But they just said, hey, Ryan, please, choose. I know you didn't mean, I think they said something like, I know you didn't mean to infuse a little searing pain into my morning. But please choose your words more carefully. And I'm happy to make that adjustment. Help us understand why people don't prefer or insist that the word suicide not be used in this application. And why is this significant?
Well, I think there's still a lot of stigma attached to suicide. And, suicidologists, experts in suicide will talk about the differences in somebody who has suicidality or suicidal thoughts compared to somebody who's contemplating MAiD. So typically, if you're contemplating MAiD, there's a period of reflection, there's discussion about potential options to alleviate suffering. It happens over a period of usually, weeks. It can happen more quickly if loss of capacity is imminent or if there's, really intolerable suffering. But typically it's not something that happens, you make the decision today and it happens later today. Whereas suicide, there can be a sense of impulsivity. it typically is carried out in a situation of profound distress, often when the person is alone. So it's very different. I think, I know that you fairly recently lost someone to suicide. I did as well when I was 15 years old, and it was very traumatic very, to me, the experience is very different. So there's such a sense of distress, and people, I'm not going to make light of people electing to undergo MAiD. There's distress for sure as well. But it's very different. It's, there's reflection, there's thought, there's discussion about all the different options, and hopefully there's, availability of all the different options to alleviate suffering. I don't think the same is necessarily, it can be said for suicide.
Thanks for mentioning my buddy, by the way. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry for your loss. I'll let people know if talk about this is difficult for you personally. We on June 6th talked to Jeremy Allen, who's a grief educator and a really great friend of this show, and I sure appreciated that. I asked Jeremy to join me for a journey that, those are miles I had never walked, stepping back in front of a microphone and a camera a couple of days after losing my best pal. But Jeremy talked to us about survival tools to keep living after loss. I'll link to that as well in the live chat. But it's just gave us some great things to think about amid. I'm still numb, like I'm still fucked up from that, and I will be. I'm going to miss him forever. I'm not okay. I'm okay to talk about it with you. I appreciate this audience, and we'll continue talking about men's mental health in general, first responders' mental health, and the like. But that was our June 6th episode. The title of it is How to Grieve, if people want to talk about that. Can I ask you about your chosen profession? And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of Sharon's sister. Sharon's in the chat. Her sister's a death doula. But it is like you're working in palliative care. You're reviewing applications for medical assistance in dying. This is heavy stuff, like every single day. This is heavy stuff. Who's drawn to your profession? What draws you there, and how do you manage it?
Oh, I think that all the people I can say fairly unequivocally that all the people that I work with are so compassionate that, as you say, it's a calling. They're drawn to want this desire to help alleviate suffering, a desire to help make that experience even a little bit easier for somebody. It's hard. This stuff is hard. It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be hard. I think I've never, grown the thick skin or, put up a wall. I have days where it is tough for sure. So, really focusing on the other aspects of my life and making sure there's balance in that regard can be very helpful. But it also is an immense privilege. I remember very early on in my career as a new oncology nurse, and I think it was 2:30 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and I had yet to have any kind of a break. And this patient I was working with, he said to me, "You're doubly blessed." And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. And he said, "You're doubly blessed. You get to work with somebody and help them at such an important time in their life, and you get paid for it." And I've never forgotten that. It is an immense privilege. The people in oncology and palliative care, the colleagues, the patients, the family members, they're all so incredible. It is a calling, but it is also an immense privilege to be able to work in this field.
Well, thank you so much for volunteering to talk about this and focus the conversation. We're always eager to tackle issues and touch on things that are impacting Canadians, and do it by talking to people that have lived experience, that understand it. I mean, this is what you're doing on a daily basis. It's also what you're earning your PhD in, and obviously you have a lot of experience as past president of the Canadian Association of Nurses in Oncology as well. Before we thank you for your time, is there anything that we've not touched on, or something that you see maybe as a misconception or misinformation around this, maybe something you want to leave to the audience, or something you might want to say directly to a family that is living this journey right now?
Yeah, I think, reach out for help if there are supports available for sure. I think really palliative care should be an option for anybody contemplating MAiD. So palliative care is, not intended solely for end-of-life care, but should be integrated early in the course of a serious illness, and can help alleviate physical, psychosocial, existential distress. So that's very, very important. MAiD, in my opinion, should be used judiciously and carefully, and it's irreversible, and that should never be taken lightly. We need to make sure that patients have a true choice and don't feel compelled to undergo MAiD due to lack of support, to live well. MAiD should really never be a substitute to quality, comprehensive, accessible healthcare, including end-of-life care. But it's a legal option available to those who choose it and who are eligible. And it's one more tool in the toolbox. So again, some people I see that, they're assessed, they're approved, they keep it in their back pocket. They don't necessarily ever use it. And I've had experiences where people have set the date and then they've changed their mind, and that's permissible as well. So I think it's death and dying is something we don't talk about enough in our culture. And we should, because there are ways that we can make that experience. It will never be easy. It will never be a walk in the park. It's always going to be challenging and it's always going to be difficult. But if there are ways we can make it even a little bit easier, we ought to have those discussions and make sure people feel as supported as they can.
You want to stay with me while I read this email from Leslie? This is powerful stuff. She writes into talk@ryanjesperson.com. She says, well, she starts by saying she just signed up to support us as a Patreon member. Sure, appreciate that, Leslie. She says, I've been meaning to write the show on medical assistance in dying. She says, this past summer, my dad, who is very sick with bladder cancer, chose this route to exit his body. And she said, I'm grateful that you're having Reanne Booker on the show. She says, I thought I'd share. I know everyone's experience could be very different from my dad's, but for him, I believe it was a good one. She says he was completely of sound mind, but his body was failing. He had endured several years of health problems, including prostate cancer, bladder cancer. He was a very tough fella with a high pain tolerance and the most optimistic attitude that never ceased to amaze us. He had endured 4 surgeries to remove that bladder cancer. It is not a pleasant experience. He had recurring issues with his catheter, multiple painful infections, and after every surgery, we were hopeful, but the cancer always came back. And this year, it was resolved that Dad was just not improving. He was an athletic guy his entire life, playing hockey and baseball, representing Air Canada in golf tournaments. In his senior years, we'd see him cycling the seawall in Vancouver. Being bedridden naturally took a toll on his spirit, and he stayed positive, but we knew that it was tough for him to come to terms with it all. Finally, his 88-year-old body was done, and he wanted to go. And all his friends and family, although with broken hearts, supported him in this courageous choice. He tried so hard for many years to get better, but it was time for some deserved rest. And I was so proud of him for how he stayed so positive through his illness and also for his choice to move on. When he was approved for MAiD and the date was set, he was offered many opportunities to change his mind, but he was more than ready. My sister and I flew to Vancouver, and the only way I can describe our last days with my dad is love-filled. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. I don't even know him. She said I could even describe it as magical. Me, my sister, my stepmom, given this quality time by his side, hearing his stories, his memories, his concerns for us. We promised him we'll be okay and we'll be there for our stepmom. I didn't get the hockey gene like my sister did, so she and my dad watched his final NHL game together. A lovely memory that she'll cherish. My dad and I shared a big love for his dog, Charo, that he and my stepmom had when I was a teen. I asked him to give Charo a big hug for me when he sees her again. He then asked me to hand him his wallet on the dresser. I gave it to him. He pulled out a worn, weathered photograph of that beautiful dog. I couldn't believe he had kept it in his wallet the entire time. I promised him I'd carry it in mine. I was so happy he gave me that, a very special moment. And when the time came for him to pass, we were all close beside him, holding his hand, sending him off with as much love and support as we possibly could, letting each other know how grateful we all are for each other. There was sorrow and celebration. My dad knew he'd lived a wonderful life. He was grateful for that. I feel like the 2 most sacred times in life are birth and death, when we take the first breath and when we take our last. And I'm so honored to have witnessed my father's last. The doctor who came to administer the medical assistance was beyond wonderful. My dad had previously met with them, was so impressed and happy that this was the doctor that would be involved. A nurse was present. We felt respect and kindness from them both. She says, this year, 4 of my loved ones have taken their last breath, and each passing, with the exception of my dad's, I didn't get to say a proper goodbye. I try not to dwell in it. I do believe we all, each and every one of us, lives on that birth and death, the only doors to a different reality, and our breath is our conscious in physical form. For our family, MAiD provided my dad with a much-deserved relief from a terminal disease he had endured for far too long. It provided the time for my dad's many friends to visit, to give him heartfelt goodbyes and for us to have that special time. I myself, says Leslie, do not fear death. It's unfortunate that society seems to perpetuate this fear of death, especially by way of religion. She says, I find that the religious right in particular, the most opposed to MAiD, yet the ideal is to live a long, full, and vibrant life. A death of a loved one who's passed too young or in a traumatic way can be devastating for the loved ones left behind. She says, a personal note. She says, but for me, death is not an ending, but continuing on in another way. And that thought brings me peace. That from Leslie. I can't tell you how much it means when audience members share their personal stories like that.
Yeah, I would say to Leslie and her family, huge condolences. So sorry for the loss. But as she described, that experience probably will impact their bereavement outcomes in the sense that they had the chance to spend that quality, meaningful time together and to get to say goodbye. And as I'm thinking of that, I'm reminded of another family where, the patient had created a playlist and they all listened together and talked. And then when he made the decision, he stood up and he hugged his adult children and thanked them. And then, it proceeded on and in the loving embrace of his loved ones. And it was very peaceful and very different, I think, than some endings can be. Again, not a choice for everyone. And I definitely respect religious objections and opposition. But I do also respect people's right to choose. And that, again, I think is where I'm a little concerned going forward and what might be coming in terms of, changes with our healthcare system. So again, I just deep condolences to Leslie and her family. And thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thanks for doing this, Reanne. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Ryan.
You got it. That's Reanne Booker joining us. You can follow her on Twitter. Of course, we release the lineup for every show by way of our Real Talk RJ Twitter account, and we've linked to her account there if you'd like to follow up with her or keep in touch. And we encourage you to share this episode with people that are walking these miles, or people this will resonate with, people that are on this journey. I did want to mention, we were talking about mental health. We've been talking about those mental health supports and the commitment that this show is making. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, coming up on October 5th, that Saturday, October 5th, I'd love for you to join me and others in partnership with the Mental Health Foundation. You can find more information on this event at mentalhealthfoundation.ca. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's Highway to Healing, driving the conversation on mental health in partnership with Sherwood Motor Cars. Have you ever been out to Sherwood Motor Cars? I need to take you out there. This place, they bring in.
Is this the videos you showed me?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is like the most affordable vehicle in there is like 180 grand. They've got like the fully restored 66 Chevelles, and they've got the rare Ferraris and the Maseratis and the Bugattis and those big G-Wagons that everybody loves. And it's like an exotic car boutique is what it is. And they ship these cars all around the world. It's like no other car dealership I've ever been in. But it's also a wonderful event space. They've got like beautiful brushed concrete floors and graffiti everywhere. And so we're going to have...
You're a lover of dual spaces.
Yes.
Like you're a lover of like workspaces that can instantly transform into
That's what this is.
A shindig.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we're going to have like gourmet food and drinks. It's a bit of a cocktail mixer. You're obviously going to be able to check out these beautiful cars. And then it kind of opens up the door for us to talk about mental health. And so, you can obviously, there's a panel discussion that I'm proud to be hosting. We're going to be talking about raising awareness, and we're going to raise money for critical mental health initiatives across the province of Alberta. You can register today either to attend with the proceeds going to the Mental Health Foundation, or if you'd like to sponsor the event as well, you can check out mentalhealthfoundation.ca. That's coming up October 5th in the evening out at Sherwood Motor Cars in Sherwood Park, and I hope to see you there.
Well, I hope to see you there too.
Yeah. You want to come? You should come, man.
I think I'll come.
You got to see this space. It's
there.
beautiful.
Yeah.
We also appreciate Leslie. I just wanted to mention that one more time, sharing that story with us, or her family story. Yeah. She, if you're listening on the podcast, Johnny was also showing us some photos that she submitted on our YouTube show. So if this is something that's landed with you and you'd like to have your say on this, we encourage you to send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Rianne's last point, I think, is an important one. I don't think that medical assistance in dying is inherently right or wrong. I think it's absolutely right for some people, and I think that some people will feel that it's not the choice for them, and that's fine.
But there should be a choice.
I too respect the
point,
religious objections of people, and that is fine. You can object against something like this for a myriad of reasons, including your religious beliefs, but I do not believe that any religious belief should be imposed on the general population.
No.
And I don't believe that religious convictions should stand in the way of public health care delivery at facilities that are receiving public funding.
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, that's a great point. And it's just like this whole MAiD thing kind of grew out of, people who refuse medical treatment later in life. And it happens so much and we don't hear about it, but like it happens all the time where someone gets cancer for the third time and they don't want to go through chemo again, or someone gets some sort of disease or something like you were talking about her father, Leslie's father, trying to get better after years and years and just going through pain. And it's like, they got to go. And this hits me personally because my grandmother just a few months ago left this planet because she was in pain and she took a form of MAiD. And I went home to see her maybe a month and a half before this happened. And she said, don't come when I wanted to visit her in Ontario. She said, don't come. And I said, Grandma, I'm coming. I missed the passing of my grandfather. I did not want to not see my grandmother before she left this earth. And I went home and saw her. And you know what? Now that I think back on it, it was selfish of me because she couldn't even sit for 2 hours with me. She was in pain. She was in and out of, she didn't have dementia.
It wasn't selfish, Johnny.
What I'm saying is, if she had, I think maybe she had wanted to go earlier and she waited because I wanted to come visit her, which is great. But at the same time, who am I to make that decision for anyone to be like, hey, can you stay in pain for a month and a half more so I can come see you? And it really wasn't, I expected to go out there and spend a whole day with her. She couldn't even sit with me for longer than 2-3 hours. So it really hits home, and I understand like the pain people are going through and how it's their choice to not want to be here and go through that for months, years, like Leslie's father went through. Like, it's just...
I loved her
it's
story
not
of
right.
like how her dad, she's like, and it's like,
who are we to choose for people to sit here and just,
it's and honestly, like your choice, like who gives a shit what anybody else thinks also, you know what I mean? Like, I understand some people like other people's opinion of what you're choosing for yourself is irrelevant. Let me also empower you with that. I love that Leslie was talking about her. She knows she doesn't have to defend her dad's decision. And I don't think that was the spirit of her email, but still, she was talking about how he was so tough and he had a high pain tolerance and he was optimistic. And I think that she did a really beautiful job of helping us understand what made her dad tick and how he was wired. And I bet for a lot of people, these are the conversations they've had to have with their family. I shared this once before on the show. A friend of mine, his name's Jeff. His mom elected to receive
I love
medical
this story. I
assistance
was
in
going to
dying.
ask you to bring it up.
Yeah,
because if people haven't heard it,
just
tell
very
them.
briefly.
Yeah.
So she was living with a debilitating illness. More his story to tell than mine, but generally speaking, she chose MAiD, and they threw like a beautiful garden party the day of her passing, and they invited all close family and friends. They had like the beautiful festival tent, and they had music, and they had catering, like just a wonderful garden party, all according to her wishes. She was wearing her favorite outfit. She was able to spend time with everybody, and everybody knew that whatever time it was, I think it was like 7:00 or whatever it was, that was the time that she was going to say goodbye. And party goers, those her loved ones that surrounded her, were given the option of being there. Or if they would prefer to say goodbye and then let that be and leave her to be with the remaining family and friends. She said goodbye. She received that medical assistance at home. She died at home, 100% according to her wishes. And you talk to Jeff about it now. He does somebody like, he obviously loves his mom. He's crazy about his mom. I think he doesn't mind talking about it. As a matter of fact, I think when he first told me about this, it felt like he had sought out the opportunity to talk to me about it because he wants people to understand why his mom chose it. He wants people to understand that it can be, and in their family circumstance, it was a beautiful end-of-life situation. His mom chose how she wanted to go.
And a better option.
She didn't wait until she was completely debilitated and in enormous pain completely drugged up to manage that pain, unable to talk to people. Instead, she went out on her own terms according to her own wishes. And when he tells that story, man, he's got tears in his eyes, but he tells it with a smile on his face. It's beautiful. We'd love to hear your story, Real Talkers, and you know that you can always share in confidence with us. Just please be sure to clarify in those messages if you want to help us deepen our understanding of what we're talking about. I just saw that Leslie's actually with us in the chat today. I just saw that, Leslie. Thank you for being here. She says a garden party would be a lovely way to exit. My heart is full that you're here with us today, Leslie, and we sure appreciate you. She did mention our Patreon. If you do want to support the show in that way, it's your way to exclusive benefits. We've given away passes to movie festivals. You get a free pair of Real Talk socks that you can't buy on our merch store. You get all kinds of things, advance access to things like registration for our golf tournament. When we pair up with, booze barrels like bourbon or releasing beer like we did with Sea Change, you get first cracks at it. You can click on the Connect link and then you'll find Patreon, and that's where you can sign up to support us on Patreon. Coming up on Friday's episode, this is tomorrow. This is September 6th. You want to know how one of Alberta's elected senators, one of those that's waiting for the tap on the shoulder, feels about back-to-back jacks from Charles Adler and Dr. Chris Wells, neither of whom were elected? Erica Barudis is one half of the dynamic duo alongside Cheryl Oates that hosts The Discourse, a fantastic political podcast. They're going to join us for a special episode of the Real Talk Roundtable. We hope you'll join us.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson.